few years after I planted New Song Church in Windsor, Ontario, 9 years to be exact, I came to the realization that the sheer economics of pastoring an urban church required that in addition to the full-time pastoring, I also needed to work part-time to support my family. And at first I was a little disappointed that I had to go back into part-time work in addition to pastoring, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. That year in 2002, I talked to a friend of mine, Steve Green, and at the time Steve was managing a community support house in Chatham, Ontario called Hand in Hand. And he invited me to come and work with him one day a week. And so I went to Hand in Hand Counseling Center and assisted with some administration. I did do some light counseling with some individuals that were there, and got exposed to something called the reintegration program. The reintegration program was an initiative to help men in particular who were coming out of prison be reintegrated back into the communities. Most people, when they think about prisoners going away for some heinous crime or some terrible thing that they've done, some people have the attitude of, lock the doors, throw away the key, they should just rot in jail. But the truth of the matter is that every sentence has a conclusion. It's a rarity that a person will spend all of their days in jail. So coming out of prison, many men in the Chatham area would come to the services of Hand in Hand. Well, then a year later in 2003, I was invited to become the chaplain at St. Leonard's House, Windsor. And the St. Leonard's Halfway House, if you're watching the video, you can see it in the background behind me. This is not the original building. The original building that started in the late 60s began by a priest, an Anglican priest named Neil Libby. And St. Leonard's House, Windsor became the first federal halfway house in Canada. And so for 5 years, from 2003 to 2008, I served as the house chaplain, and it was just the perfect part-time job. Every pastor that has a heart for the community sometimes has a tension between the work of the church and the needs of the congregants, but then also this other larger picture of our calling to be people who care for the community. Well, as I went to work in Chatham and then at St. Leonard's House, Windsor, I soon discovered that this was the perfect way to blend a heart for the community with a pastoral responsibility. And so many evenings I would spend with men from the house. Sometimes it was taking them for coffee. Sometimes it was taking them out to shop or to see a movie. And some of the things that had been so removed from their life while they were incarcerated needed a path back into living healthy in a community. I always remember one thing that I was taught in my early years of chaplaincy, and it was that the greatest factor in preventing recidivism or men going back to jail repeatedly, the greatest factor to prevent someone from going back was the presence of having one good friend in their life. Well, as it would have it, I had the opportunity to be that good friend and to watch several men not return. Well, when that time came to an end, the man that followed me was Rielly McLaren. Rielly McLaren is still the chaplain at St. Leonard's House, has been here since 2013, I believe. And in the interview today, I'm going to be talking to Rielly about his work, but also some of the things related to the work he's done with sex offenders in the community. So I think that you're going to enjoy hearing what Rielly has to say. Rielly is a brilliant thinker and a great communicator and a man of compassion who is serving people on their journey to wholeness. Let's go to that interview that I recorded last year in 2019 with Rielly McLaren. Rielly, a few years ago, you moved to Windsor. You had come out of Heritage College in Cambridge, where you were getting your theological training. You came and you worked at Southwood Community Church on staff there. That's where we first met. And then I think that was 2008 that I first met you. And then 2010, you became the chaplain at St. Leonard's house. And I think you were 26 years old when you became the chaplain at St. Leonard's house, a halfway house for men coming out of prison. And so let's maybe start there by talking about your entry into chaplaincy. What do you remember about those early days as you tried to figure out how to have a role in the lives of the men and the staff and the people surrounding the halfway house?
Yeah, I think it really starts with my move to Windsor. Because at the time, I remember breaking up with my girlfriend in Barrie, and
that's always a good way for life change.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and packing all my things into a U-Haul and accepting a meagerly paid part-time job down here in Windsor at a church, and I remember crying for half the drive, just like, what have I done, kind of thing. And I immediately felt lonely, coming down here. And funny enough, it just so happened that when I moved here, I think it was January, and I forget what year, but something like that. And the teachers were on strike, the auto industry was on strike, the city workers were on strike, so their garbage wasn't being picked up, the parks weren't being cleaned up or mowed, so everything was overgrown, garbage is everywhere. The taxi drivers were on strike, and a number of other groups were on strike, and marching through the streets, garbage everywhere, grass and overgrowth everywhere. People were like angry, and I felt like I was Snake from Escape from L.A. It is like, whoa, what have I done? Like, oh God, why did you bring me here? This is awful. I grew up in the hill country of Huntsville and Muskoka, and so this is strange. But I slowly tried to find my way here and find folks that I connected with, and I ended up with this chaplaincy position at my young age. I remember going to these, this is when it was funded by the federal government, I remember going to these retreats for chaplains across Ontario, I guess, and across Canada, and institutional and community chaplains. And I was the youngest person, probably by about 20 years, for quite a while.
Younger than some of their kids.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right, yeah. And so I found out I was the youngest chaplain in federal corrections for a little while.
Yeah.
And so that was strange. that was weird, but I felt like there was something special happening in my life, and that I was being carried. Never really felt like I deserved anything in particular, but things were given to me to not only serve others, but for God to serve me through them and the people that I would care for.
When you entered into the halfway house and began to meet men that had committed all types of crimes, everything from murder to drug smuggling to offenses against women and children, just the whole gamut, right? And the world tends to put a particular spin on the bad guys. But what was it like for you as a 26-year-old entering into that environment?
I think in some ways I've had a lot of hope and a lot of excitement. I wasn't afraid.
Yeah.
I wasn't particularly uncomfortable. That only came with like experience and knowledge. I became afraid and uncomfortable. Yeah. I kind of miss some of those that holy naivety. But one of the things that I discovered, like right off the hop, is the folks that I was serving and working with were very normal. They weren't particularly unusual.
Yeah.
Or
not like TV.
No, not at all. They're not growling and seething, like,
yeah.
There was a commonness to the whole thing, and I almost would forget what they did to serve their time in prison or something. And it really got me thinking a lot, and it was kind of triggering that way because I realized that being in these circles reminded me a lot of my dad, and it reminded me a lot of my own family life. And
so talk a bit about that, wherever you're willing to share.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a pretty broken home, and my dad did time in jail, and my family, a lot of family members served time in jail, prisons and jail, and there was a lot of drug trafficking going on. My mom telling me that when she left my dad, I was about 6 years old. The straw that broke the camel's back is when they were setting up video cameras around the house, and a kind of a South American drug cartel was developing, and there was weapons and surveillance cameras, and that's when my mom said, "Okay, this is enough. We need to go." And
this wasn't small time.
No,
guy who sells pot anymore.
No. This is there were some serious things going. In fact, my dad would use my younger brother and I to cross the border to move drugs from the Florida and whatnot up into Canada,
right?
And cross the border, say we're going to Disneyland. We never went to Disneyland. we never went to Disneyland. To my disappointment.
Have you ever been?
No, I haven't. Yeah. But I don't want to go anymore because it seems to have a bad connotation.
Yeah.
But there was times where we got caught in the middle of drug busts, even in the United States, as kids.
You as kids?
Yeah. And I remember my dad getting arrested. I remember people that were in plain clothes all of a sudden pulling out guns.
Yeah.
And it was very confusing, very frightening as a kid. And somehow, by God's grace, was able to get back to Canada without getting caught up in some kind of system in the U.S. So I felt protected, and and so in that environment, ending up first in the church, as our family was like a project. We were the troubled family.
Yeah.
You got a sense that I look back now, it was like in youth groups and stuff. My brother and I got away with so much more than the other church kids because we were the project. We were the bad kids,
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of parents didn't want their kids hanging out with us because we were the influencers as well.
Yeah.
We would influence kids and get them to do ridiculous stuff, and so we were influencing the church kids instead. But I think in a lot of ways they influenced us too. They made a safe space for us. That was stable, that had guidelines and even rules, where we could feel safe. But I digress. The church world, and then discovering chaplaincy and community-based work, getting my hands dirty in the community, I found a lot of catharsis. That God was doing something more than just, here's some Christian pastor or chaplain coming in to save the day,
right?
With Bible in arm, and that's more like colonial reflections of evangelism and stuff that I don't think is what we actually see in the Bible. or in the book of Acts. We see Christians going to places and discovering that God was already there, and identifying the presence of God in the midst of people.
Right.
Not going, I'm the one that now is the purveyor.
Yeah.
So
if you had any arrogance as a 26-year-old in a halfway house, I'm sure you quickly dispelled.
I feel like Lawes, I have nothing to offer here.
Yeah.
But I am witnessing the presence and the movement of God among the most despised and some of the most hated people in our society. It doesn't get more hated probably than murderers and sex offenders.
Yeah.
And yet that is where I experienced Christ. And I wanted to be close to that. I wanted to be close to Christ.
Yeah.
And see what was up here.
Seems like there's just a real cultural famine of meaning, for a lot of people in the world struggling to understand what does my life mean, where I fit in, and to be able to walk with Christ and meet Christ in that kind of environment. That can be very grounding, can it? It gives you a deep sense of meaning.
Yeah. There's also the possibility for deception too. There's both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something that I've seen being both the church world and the non-for-profit social, what I call the social work industrial complex.
Okay.
Yeah. Where, pastors oftentimes, they'll get really disillusioned with the church as a whole and be like, oh, this is nonsense, we're not getting anything done, and da-da-da-da. And so they go to more community-based work, and they have this romantic relationship with it at first.
Right.
That is very like, oh, this is what the church should really be doing, and it's all about this, and all the churches are doing it wrong, and and there's some merit in some of those criticisms.
You really captured that inflection well.
Yeah. But then what happens? You discover that there's assholes everywhere.
Yeah.
and sometimes the social work industrial complex wants to stab you in the back just as much as any church and any church leader or elders or whatever, that like assholes are everywhere. And wherever people gather and seek to do anything, there's always infiltrations that seek to sabotage the good work of God. And I'm not talking about political correctness. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I get asked by church folk all the time, so are you allowed to talk about Jesus at the halfway house? And I'm like, yeah. What? Really? You are? It's like, you've been listening to the wrong podcast, man.
Yeah.
You think that the world's against you or something like that. But it's like how you enter into these spaces and how you serve them will determine whether or not people want to listen.
Right.
And ask you these
so
questions.
in terms of navigating, as a Christ follower, encountering sometimes the dark side of church, sometimes the dark side of social work. How does a young man keep his heart pure?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I don't think that the question of like, how do I keep myself pure can be asked outside of what Christ has already accomplished and finished.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I believe that, Christ has made me pure in him and through that forgiveness. Yeah. And now the question isn't protecting that as much as it is living into it.
Yeah.
And experiencing it and habituating myself
growing
to
into it.
Yeah, I would say habituating myself in it.
Right.
And not settling for what some songwriters have called lovers less wild.
Yeah.
But I think part of that journey is your heart breaking.
Yeah.
And discovering what corners of your being you have yet to uncover. When we encounter the broken and the poor, there is a direct relationship to encountering Christ and then encountering the ways we have not surrendered to what is already true in ourselves, where there's pockets of resistance in our own being to receiving Christ's sort of healing and insight and wholeness.
So, talk to me about the role of forgiveness in your spiritual formation. How has this great grace that we believe in, that God forgives us, and that we are called to a life of forgiveness?
Yeah, sure.
You've obviously there's a journey through forgiveness throughout life, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's first important, especially for any of your listeners, viewers, to that are interested in like social work or work on the ground in relation to your question, is recognizing the power of transference and countertransference. Transference being the effects that the work of the ministry, whatever you're doing, has upon you, what it's doing to you, what you're taking with you, what ways you've been wounded by it, what ways that it's complying to your own complexes or own ego needs, is important to understand. And if you don't understand them, it's going to cause trouble. Countertransference is when we're trying to work out our own problems through other people that we serve.
Right. This is going to heal me if I can fix you.
Now, here's the thing. A lot of ministerial training and a lot of social work training say you can't have transference and countertransference. You got to work all that stuff out before you get into it. And I disagree.
Good luck. Eh?
Yeah, I disagree. The reality is it will happen.
Yeah.
It's whether or not you're aware of it. Because either you are using it or it will use you. So that is the step towards perhaps forgiveness, perhaps some kind of personal wholeness, when you're aware. I think it was like Carl Jung who said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Right? So there's all these things that are stirring around inside us. And so when we encounter the broken, and we want to either avoid them, push them away, or try to fix them, we first have to recognize whether or not we're avoiding something painful inside us that this brings up, or we're trying to fix them because we're trying to fix something in ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
So make it personal.
Yeah.
You got stories about that that you can share?
Well, I think I said that, when I was hanging around the halfway house, it kind of felt like I was hanging out with my dad.
Right.
And it was strange. Similar charges, but similar personalities, very similar kinds of ways of interacting with the world. And it took me off guard at first, but it was enough a distance that I could look at this person with compassion, even though maybe I wasn't looking at my father with compassion.
Right.
And more judgmental and angry. But it taught me that mercy is not about, just being like nice to somebody that's done us wrong, but it's about fidelity to the image of God in them, something deeper that's beyond their sins, beyond their mistakes. And so in this journey, there's been a number of moments where when I'm encountering another person that reminds me of someone in my life.
Right. Easy to make the transfer.
Yeah. There's all of a sudden there's a transference, and then how I treat that person is going to be a result of my own countertransference. And I'll never forget the first person that I really spent meaningful time with that committed murder. The very next day, the evening, I had a dream that I had murdered somebody in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't remember doing it. I remember the before of the relationship and then after, and feeling overwhelmed with guilt and feeling like I need to hide the body and I need to do this and I need to do that. And I remember waking up feeling so distraught. And then I realized something, that there's unresolved business in my life that God wanted to address. and that I was hanging on to a lot of bitterness and resentment towards my own family and people in my family that had caused harm. And I remember going home one day and sitting down with this person around the dinner table, and it had been years and years had passed since they had committed these crimes and made these mistakes. And I said, there's something I need to tell you, and I need to ask for your forgiveness, because I was planning on killing you. And I never did it, obviously.
Right.
The person's still breathing.
Yeah.
But I realized that I was hanging on to all this stuff, and I need your forgiveness, please. And I want to let you know that I love you. And this person obviously was really taken back and also apologized for what they had done. And they were so distraught that it had caused me that kind of anger and resentment.
Right.
And forgave me, and I forgave them, and it healed our relationship to the point where we could see each other in a new way and have a deep love for each other, and to watch this person thrive and do well and discover God's calling in their life and move forward has just been incredible privilege. But it started with the first person.
Right.
That society would reject was Christ to me. That started me on a path. But here's the thing with transference and countertransference. She's like, wow, Rielly, there's a lot of transference, countertransference going on there. I'm like, yeah, it's whether or not you're aware of it.
Right.
If you're not aware of it, if, like Carl Jung says, it stays unconscious, it just wreaks havoc, right?
Yeah.
But when you're aware of it, you can use it in a way that doesn't harm people.
Right.
That it becomes a tool instead of you becoming a tool. Yeah. And I think that is so important, and that has to do with self-awareness. Many urban ministers, anybody doing urban ministry, social justice stuff, to be able to recognize that you are going in with all your own baggage and stuff, and you can't rescue people, you can't save people, but you can be present and you can be sensitive to where God is already. And have the eyes to see it, to identify it, and to nurture it, and to allow it, that presence to thrive. And that has to do also with your own wholeness and how God wants you to heal. I think Jesus mixes up roles and hierarchy all the time.
Yeah.
But he says, the greatest among you will be the one who serves.
Yeah.
And that was a lower position, socially speaking.
Yeah.
That people that were sitting at the table were the well-to-do, the people that had the money, had the power, had the influence. And so for Jesus to say the greatest one is the one who serves is the one on the low scale, on the low economic scale.
We're still trying to figure that out, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times we're still trying to hide the body. You know, the things that the atrocity that anybody has committed in life. And the things you're ashamed of, it's easy to want to bury that body, hide that body, rather than recognize it, bring it into consciousness, and give it a proper burial.
Yeah, and I would say this happens on a societal level too, particularly with sexual offenders, where they hold our collective darkness, even though as a society, in a lot of ways, we're responsible for creating the kind of environment where these sorts of things happen. And we don't always do well at protecting our most vulnerable people.
Right.
And we seek to alienate people that do struggle.
So let's talk a bit about another part of your work, vocation. From chaplaincy, the door opened. There's a psychotherapist, Paul Adams in Windsor, who for many years has run programs for sex offenders. And you got brought in to help facilitate groups. And how did that come about? And let's talk about sex, Rielly.
Well, you might remember, I had to facilitate a group. I had the honor of facilitating a group on Thursdays, and so I call Thursday Sex Thursday.
That's right.
Yeah, that's where I listen to people talk about sex, talk to people about sex, and I didn't have any sex.
Single celibate guy.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Still.
And so it's just a strange, experience that I'll never forget, and it was very formative. Sitting in a circle with 10 to 15 men that have committed sexual offenses, and helping them do their work to understand why they did it, to grow in their empathy towards the victims, the people they've harmed, and to establish, these understand their offense cycles, and so that then they don't do them again. So there's the appropriate interventions in place for themselves, so that they don't do this kind of stuff ever again. And it was a very humbling experience, and oftentimes difficult, but also hopeful space, where I think of the 7 years of facilitating this group every Thursday. I was like over 100 men in the area, Windsor area, that was able to serve and help and encourage a safer community ultimately. Because I can count on one hand the amount of guys who reoffended.
Wow.
So over 100, kind of came through, and
only
like
a handful
5
reoffended.
Yeah, I can think of 5.
That totally goes against the narrative that you hear.
Yeah.
That, they can't be cured. You can't change them.
Right.
They're stuck like that.
Yeah, and in some cases that's true, and when it is, it's about risk reduction.
Right.
And risk management. And so a lot of these guys, even though they might have a propensity towards a sexual attraction to minors or something, they don't also want to harm anybody.
Right.
So if their empathy is functioning, they recognize that this is a pickle that I'm in, and so how do we lower the chances of you reoffending, and you have the proper boundaries in your life so that you don't act on this. But then there's others that, every once in a while, somebody that would be a genuine psychopath or something would come through, and that, this is not good.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, there's either these forms of regression where somebody that doesn't have they have a same age attraction. They're not attracted to minors, but they still did something against a minor, and they don't even understand why they did it. And so the work, the group work, the individual work is getting to the bottom of that. And then the ones that do have that primary attraction towards minors, it's about risk management and safety, and them buying into that plan, that that being a part of their own commitment, their own plans.
When it comes to what do you think people need to understand? First of all, when we talk about us and them, and something like sex offenders, it has such a knee-jerk reaction in society, and it should because it's offensive. But talk to me. Give me some insights here. What do we need to be learning, as people, as sexual beings? What are some of the deep lessons that you saw in that deviance or in that failure?
Oh, sure, yeah. There's lots of stuff, I guess, that we could talk about. I think.
Let me ask the question. If somebody is committing sexual crimes, are they often narcissistic?
I guess it depends what you mean by narcissistic, in the sense of just putting your own needs or what you think your needs are, your own appetite, before anything else, even other people's humanity. That's sure, it's narcissistic, but I think there's also deep, profound brokenness, and that all poverty and crime Well, harm is fundamentally about broken relationships.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, broken relationships with the community, broken relationships with ourselves, broken relationship with God, and broken relationships with our neighbors.
Yeah.
And so you see that play out, and harm it has a way of building on top of itself, creating more harm. But what it means to put the spoke in the wheel of harm is not to coddle offenders, not to say, oh, it's really not that bad. There is accountability, but there is also mercy.
Right.
And mercy is not a more powerful person extending, leniency. That's not what mercy is.
No.
I know.
Might be the opposite of mercy, to be lenient.
Yeah, absolutely. Mercy is the fidelity, like I said, to the image of God and people, regardless or no matter how distressing their disguise. And that's what we see in the Hebrew word chesed. When the book of Micah says what the Lord of God has these things that He asks of you, to live justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God.
Yeah.
That love of mercy is the word chesed, and that means covenant. Chesed means covenant. It's one of the most mysterious words in the Hebrew language in the Old Testament, and it means it's translated all sorts of different ways in English translations, but it means a fidelity to covenant. And it's this idea that
is it related to grace in the sense of honoring someone and committing to someone who doesn't deserve your approval?
It just has to do with, I think, the willingness to see the covenant that God made with humankind, all people.
Yeah.
Before their actions, their behaviors tried to tell them who they are.
Yeah.
Before the world tried to tell them who they are, there was something more essential in the human person. And so mercy is the fidelity to that, and then the response. What is the response? What does it mean to be faithful to the image of God in all people, even people that have done horrific, monstrous things? What honors the image of God in them? That is mercy.
Yeah.
What helps the image of God thrive in others?
Right.
In how we treat this person. So if we're putting people at risk, we're not honoring the image of God in them. If we're not helping someone work through their issues. But if we dehumanize and ostracize and alienate somebody who's committed terrible offenses, we're not honoring the image of God in them.
Right.
When we're just looking for blood, we're just looking for vengeance, we're just looking for a pound of flesh.
Yeah.
And interesting thing, it never really satisfies people. Right. There's never enough time that someone can do. There's never enough punishment. And I think it speaks to the flawed nature of our traditional justice system that is focused on sort of punitive kind of correction, but there's nothing. But there's nothing that the science suggests that actually makes the community safer.
Right.
Punishment doesn't make the community safer.
Yeah.
Places that have really high punishment, like really severe punishments, aren't actually places that have lower crime.
So in that Nietzschean idea that God is dead, Nietzsche said, when we dehumanize, when we fail to recognize mercy and honor the image of God in somebody, essentially we're God is dead and we killed him. You know, and I think that's the aspect of the crucifixion too, right?
Absolutely,
is that we can't blame the first century Jews, we can't blame the Romans. There's something in all of us that kills God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing too is that God knew that God needed to die.
Yeah.
And there's a mystery there.
Yeah.
But perhaps this is getting a little philosophical here, but I think it's important. Perhaps God knew that our constructions of God were unhealthy and in some ways kind of primitive, and just like gods are just the ones that are angry with us and that war for supremacy and are insecure. And God is like, that idea of God needs to go.
Yeah.
And so in the death of God,
Fullness of God revealed in Jesus.
Yeah. And is like, like, my God, why have you forsaken me? That God forsakes God in this moment. And there is a fundamental death of a construction of God. That's why I think the temple curtain was torn in two. And that, I think, is a little bit of a play on words, because the temple's torn and they look inside so they can see now. And what do they discover? Nothing's there. And so it's a democratization of God.
Right.
It's the no. Like, God isn't just located here. The glory of God fills the whole earth. Yeah. And in Christ has opened that door, that access. Yeah. So when it comes to working with sex offenders, I think one of the things that it brought up in me is the darkness of my own heart. Because I'm in a lot of social work circles and I'm in a lot of Christian and religious circles, one of the things that's kind of people struggle with in all different spheres is like sin. But I don't think there's a lot of good understanding of like what sin is. There needs to be a better understanding. Some people think of it as just this thing that makes you inherently bad, and we're all these little worms that that deserve to be stomped on or something. And it just kind of goes against the whole idea that God created us and called us good. The Bible starts with Genesis 1, not Genesis 3. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people, it's like, well, there's kind of no such thing, or this is an oppressive kind of primitive topic that is just used to shame people. And sometimes it is. It's just weaponized to hurt people and make people feel less than. But I think a more robust understanding of sin is what working with sex offenders and people that have committed murders helped me, because it forced me to have to go, well, what is this? What is this destructive force in the world? What is this evil? And it's beyond this person. Yeah, that's sitting in front of me.
I recognize that smell.
Yeah. And I still love that person. I see that God is working in this person's life, and in no way am I okay with what they did. But there's something here that we need to name. Yeah. And brilliant. Yeah, and being able to have a better, what I would say, an ontology of sin is important. That and I think we have too much. We've been too influenced by our traditional justice system, and so we latch on too much judicial language to the notion of sin, though I think there's some of that in the scriptures. The far bigger picture of sin is that it is what causes death in all ways of life, in all forms of life, and it's more like a sickness that needs to be healed. That sin is a disease. Yeah. It's not something to use as a weaponized sort of battering ram or mallet to smack people around to let them know they're miserable. People already know that the world's broken. So there's this thing going around that's like, among Christian circles, it's like, oh, people need to know the bad news before they can know the good news. And there's this need to like kind of mold people into this agreement with these sorts of propositional statements when it's very apparent that people know that something's wrong in the world. There's very few people that would go around and say, everything's fine and there is nothing wrong. But what is the nature of that wrong? So restorative justice asks these questions, right? Who has been harmed? What is the nature of this wrong? Let's name it. Let's be specific about it. Let's understand the harm, and then what the needs are among people to help heal that harm. What can we do? What are our obligations? I think it also has shone a light for me on the whole Me Too and Church Too movement in North America in particular. and the suffering of women in particular at the hands of men, of authority figures, all that kind of stuff. The being on the front lines and listening to the stories of rape, listening to the stories of sexual abuse, and the ideologies that are entangled into the men in my group that gave permission for them to act. I see it. This isn't a secret attack on all men everywhere, to diminish the value of men in society. There is a concerted effort, though, to be able to recognize and name harm that has gone unchecked, that has not been held to account.
Yeah.
And to
there's such a double standard in our culture, isn't there, around accountability?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hearing about the stories and hearing what led to their offenses, and things don't just happen like that. There's this buildup, and these ways that things aren't addressed, people aren't held accountable, or people aren't nurtured and loved through their own harm. They're not heard, they're not listened to, they're not believed. And not everyone who's victims of sexual abuse become offenders. Right. Then it would be astronomical, it would be absolutely insane. But a small percentage do.
So the prophets and Jesus, in portraying this vision of the kingdom of God, one of the descriptions is of, in this perfected kingdom, a wolf and a child, being able to play together, and be in harmony, be at peace. I think restorative justice is looking for that kind of kingdom where the offender and the victim are able to both come to a new place, a place where they are free from
the power of the offense.
The power of the offense.
Yeah.
The power of
the harm.
Yeah, and the shame of vulnerability.
Yeah.
How could that happen to me? Why didn't I stop it? Why didn't somebody stop it? I was unprotected. Yeah. You also CBC did a documentary on you and a group that you lead, co-lead with someone else out of St. Leonard's House a few years ago, and talk about. We've talked a fair bit about those that we would say are more of the wolf nature, the offender, but what about the victims and the group that you led? Talk about that.
Yeah, so in my journey in chaplaincy working with offenders, I discovered that there's all sorts of tertiary victims. So in understanding harm, which is the nature of restorative justice, there is this realization that there's all sorts of ripple effects when it comes to harm, and one of them is the family of the offenders. Particularly moms and partners of offenders. Moms do a harder time than their kids, when it comes to going to prison. So as I spent time with family members and listened to their stories and heard their grief, I realized that they could really support each other. And at the same time, the parole office here in Windsor approached St. Leonard's House, and myself and Jen and my co-leader said, hey, this would really be helpful if we had some kind of support group. Would you consider doing it? And I said, well, I've actually been thinking about it too. So let's do this. And we started with 3 ladies. One was her husband gone to prison, and then 2 mothers, and one other lady who had a husband who did time. And it just grew from there, and became more and more effective in watching some of these ladies express their own pain, their own stories when they've been silenced by either the court system or they've been silenced by their own loved ones, or they've been silenced by their own families, they've been fired from their jobs They didn't do it. They didn't commit the offense,
Yeah.
but there is this proximity that the culture feels to the offender, and that makes them almost contaminated for some reason, even though it's not true at all.
Yeah.
And so they are ostracized, alienated, alone, oftentimes very depressed. They get their houses vandalized. They get their cars vandalized. Their families make ultimatums about either if you're going to be in their life, then you're dead to us.
Sometimes their partner is incarcerated.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very unfair to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They
Yeah.
bark demands at them over the phone and
Yeah.
mistreat them, and so they are trapped in this misery for years and years, and they feel no way out. And there's some ladies that have attempted to take their own life, and to be with them through those things, to give them space to validate their world, just to validate their own harm, to say, I see you, I hear you, I am naming this sin. I don't say it that way, but in light of our discussion, I'm like, you have been harmed, you have been sinned against, you have been hurt.
Yeah.
And what can we do to help? How can we listen? How can we support each other? What are the boundaries that we can make to help you make, so that you can begin to live again?
Yeah.
And then to see the ladies support each other as so profound, to see them smile again, but then also to see them work through their pain, to have the courage to name what was happening. Some of the ladies couldn't even say the name of their sons or their loved one.
Wow.
Just to say the name
Wow.
is painful, and let alone say what they've done. And
Yeah.
so, we don't make major requirements. We don't put a lot of requirements on them to speak or to share their story or anything like that, just to agree to some basic boundaries in the group.
Yeah.
And we watch as their strength emerges, or they discover themselves through that process, and a new way of being in the world, and releasing some of the shame or some of the guilt.
Right.
We've talked a lot about self-forgiveness, particularly with moms. They blame themselves for the awful things maybe their loved one has done. If they just made different choices when they were young, if they parented them in a different way, if they just did this or just did that, then maybe things would be different. And of course, that takes away the agency of the person who committed the offense. So the process of forgiving themselves if they did make a mistake, being kind to themselves, but also letting their loved one go. And that doesn't mean never having a relationship with them. It means letting them own their own choices.
Right.
And letting yourself own your own choices.
Yeah.
That's a messy process. It's difficult and painful. But just the stories, Kevin, are just incredible.
I picture the mother of Jesus, Mary, standing at the foot of the cross, or near the cross, with some other women, and John, the disciple, Jesus' best friend, standing there with Jesus' mother.
Yeah.
Jesus, the criminal, is being executed, and she's an observer to his execution. And he looks at her and he says, "Woman, behold your son," referring to, well, yeah, she could see her son, but here's John.
Sure.
"Woman, behold your son." And he says to John, "Behold your mother." Here's this
intimate moment.
Moment of the horrific things that are unfolding. And in the midst of it, God makes a way for Mary, who was likely a widow at this point. We don't see Joseph in the picture. Her oldest son, Jesus, who was her support system, now he's gone. And God, where are you?
Mm.
And God, where is my human connection?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Jesus sees what's unfolding, and he says, you know, John, Mom,
Yeah.
you know, here's a connection that needs to be made.
Reminds me of, I forget if it's Isaiah or Jeremiah, it says, God sets the lonely in families.
Yeah.
It's sort of like right at that moment of the cross.
Yeah.
You know, God has set the lonely in families, even in the face of God's own death.
Mm.
And that's powerful. And I think I see that in, you know, these kinds of support groups,
Mm-hmm.
where people get to care for each other and create family, community, through validating and listening, through facilitating and holding space for
Yeah.
the experience of other people. And I think that's something that we struggle with right now in our culture is, how do we hold space for other people and their own experience? We want to dismiss people's experiences based on ideology,
Yeah.
and as opposed to just letting people express their harm or letting them express wherever they're at in their own experiences. We want to silence or quiet those voices down on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And
it's our phony way of being nice.
yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Chaplaincy has made me less nice,
Yeah.
but it's made me more kind.
That's better.
Yeah.
That's better.
It has worked through, it's drawn out or untangled a lot of those things in my life that I felt I needed to be or do for other people, and challenged me to be a better expression of God's image in me, instead of just this kind of butter spread over too much bread. Yeah, you know, from Lord of the Rings, you know, that's just kind of like nice to everyone.
Yeah.
And that's what it means to be a disciple or something.
Right.
But it definitely made me more kind and more boundaried.
Yeah.
And be able to
Bounded
see.
kindness.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Actually, you know, all this stuff reminds me of another quote. Rabbi Schneerson, he said, he's talking about the end of the world in kind of dramatic fashion, and he said, only the darkness must wind itself to its end, and it must be robbed of the treasures it holds. For the most precious things of this world are held in darkness. And that's why we must struggle with the darkness now and not run from it. All the torment it gives us, all our toil to overcome it, to tame it, and to dig out the diamonds it conceals.
Right now, somebody who's paying attention to this podcast just went.
Yeah.
And they're hitting rewind.
Yeah, that's what, you know, I think that's what I've learned, you know, and I see the kingdom of God as like lightning bolts in the darkness. If you take away, just use it as a symbol, and you see it two-dimensionally, it looks like tears of light in the midst of darkness. That's what a lightning bolt looks like. It's tearing the fabric of darkness,
Right.
and its light is coming through.
Yeah.
And I think the kingdom of God is kind of like that. It is like these bolts of lightning in a two-dimensional world that is light trying to break through darkness, because these precious things are held in darkness, and we illuminate them,
Right.
discover them, but we have to go to it.
Right.
You know, just like Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that, you know, the life of a Christian isn't about being immersed around friends. It's actually about being in the midst of enemies. You know, and learning how to love our enemies, to pray for people that hurt us and hurt society.
Yeah.
Because, I think in that moment, we are transformed through learning how to do that. And we discover that we are often an enemy to ourselves. And we are often in enmity with God and with other people. And so to learn how to love our enemies is to learn how to love ourselves, learn how to love God, learn how to connect with the things that are held in darkness.
Something else that intrigues me about you is
Something else, please tell me.
Something else,
Do tell. What else do you love? Count the ways.
Okay, so part of your life has also been in the function of a pastor within churches, part of pastoral teams. When I met you, you were at Southwood Community Church, which was, I think, was it Fellowship Baptist at that time. Then you came to work with us for a few years at New Song Church, which is Pentecostal.
Right, you're the chandelier swingers, right?
Yeah, that's right. frothing all the time, you know.
The Holy Spirit's the weird uncle of the Trinity kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you got us pegged.
Yeah. I went from the real stoic, to the.
Then you went to you've had ministry at Lakeshore St. Andrews, which was kind of an emergent Presbyterian church that was kind of following the Willow Creek model for a few years, and then kind of outgrowing that model.
Too soon.
Yeah. Outgrowing that model, and then now you're an interim pastor at a Mennonite church, and so I would say you're very pan-tribal.
Yep,
you know?
That's true. Yeah,
so
that's true. Yeah.
Do you have a horse and buggy?
Maybe.
No.
Do I wish I had one?
Well, maybe, yeah. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
So okay, all jokes aside.
Yeah.
What have you discovered as you've served God's people in various settings that sometimes have their own theological flavor or emphasis?
Sure.
How's that?
Well, it's been an interesting journey. Yeah. It really has. I went to Catholic school. I was the Protestant kid, got sent to the office for asking questions in class. And then, I served at some Fellowship Baptist churches. I've served at United churches, served at Anglican churches. I as you know, I like the robes.
Yeah.
The clergy outfits and stuff are fun. This was like, you feel like a Jedi or something. And then other cases I've, served in Pentecostal and Presbyterian and, now Mennonite. And so people ask me, they're like, so what is with you? What is this stuff? And I just say, I'm just denominationally promiscuous, but I'm historically monogamous.
Wow, man!
I'm monogamous. I am faithful to
listeners,
the historic.
Hit the rewind.
Yeah,
hit the rewind right now, listeners.
And don't edit out any words, okay? You have to leave the full quote in because that could look bad.
That's right.
Okay. The experience of
we'll catch it in post, Bill.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The journey has been fascinating because I didn't grow up in a particular Christian tradition, right? Yeah. Just got exposed to the church as a youngster, particularly in recovery communities. When my mom got clean and sober out of rehab and met my stepdad, they were in recovery. Yeah. And so that journey and my first experiences of faith I was reflecting upon were the 12 steps. If that was my confession of faith, my doctrinal statement early on, it was formative in my own life with the 12 steps. And, that was, I really value that a lot in terms of my own journey. And so for us, when we decided to go to church, it was like, what are we looking for in a church? We had no idea. And so we sat down as a family and got a piece of paper. It was like, what are we looking for in a church? And all that we could think of is that they loved us and taught the Bible. That was it.
What a great starting point.
And that was it.
Wow.
And so we went to every church under the sun, from really, really liturgical and structured to really, really charismatic. Yeah. I think I've told you before, somebody invited us to go to a church that met in a gym, and we didn't know anything about church planting and using facilities. So my stepdad was like, "This isn't some kind of clown operation, is it?" And she said, "No. This is it's okay. It's good. You'll like it." No joke. We go on Sunday. The greeter at the door is dressed like a clown.
Come on.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if there was some kind of I don't know, special service or kids program or something, but for some reason, so we're like, wow, like this is, yeah, yeah, this is something else. And well, the church wasn't for us, it wasn't really.
That wasn't,
No.
you didn't see yourself as clowns.
No. But, attending like meetings, even as a kid, my mom couldn't find a babysitter or something like that.
Yeah.
And it was like a celebration meeting. I just remember all these nice adults sitting around in a circle talking about their feelings, and me just eating cake and my mom actually recently told us a story. She remembers like my brother and I just fell asleep under her chair.
Wow.
In a 12-step group. Yeah, in a 12-step group. And I don't know how that was accepted, but it seemed to be okay, in this small town, Ontario.
Yeah.
And she was doing her recovery work. And we felt safe enough to sleep, under our chair. And I look back to like a lot of fondness and appreciation. We wouldn't have got through it if it wasn't for believers that really lived into the Beatitudes of the 12 steps. Lived into the principles underneath it and accepted us into community. And so I think I've been able to find community in any Christian community that I've, entered into, because if it is close, it reflects this historic faith that has been passed down.
You were born adaptable.
Yeah. I think that's really possible. And the other thing is, I love seeing the angles or the nuances of particular faith traditions, what they emphasize and maybe what they underemphasize, or what their blind spots are, and what their strengths are, and being able to see that in all these different contexts and kind of live and move through these different places.
What an amazing
it really is. And I don't know a lot of folks that are able to, pastors and stuff that are able to speak in like multi-denominational environments, but I think that's what we need. We need, especially in urban ministries, we need not only churches to collaborate together from different traditions, but we need people that are able to actually be amongst each other, having to actually have skin in the game and be committed to a community, and among many, and submit to them, and to listen and to discern. The value of community is not based on whether or not it's right in everything. But I really I think it's Daniel Berrigan. He said, faith is rarely where your head is at. Our thinking, our ideas, the trends, all that kind of stuff. Nor is it where your heart is at. Our heart goes up and down, our feelings, those kinds of things are all over the place. Faith is where your ass is at. It's not where your head is at. It's not where your heart is at. It's where your ass is at. It's where you're planting your seed. It's where you choose, where you choose to do life with other people. That is what faith is. It's choosing to walk with people, and that you have something to offer them, and they have something to offer you, and to struggle through the tensions of relationships and what forgiveness looks like, what relationships look like. And Ronald Rollheiser has a brilliant quote on this topic of the church, because me, I am a critic, where I can be a pretty critic, right? But he says that the church is always God hung between two thieves. No one should be surprised or shocked at how badly the church has betrayed the gospel and how much it continues to do so today. It had never done very well. Conversely, however, no one should deny the good the church has done either. It has carried grace, produced saints, morally challenged the planet, and made, however imperfectly, a house for God to dwell on this earth. To be connected with the church is to be associated with scoundrels, warmongers, fakes, child molesters, murderers, adulterers, and hypocrites of every description. It also, at the same time, identifies you with the saints and the finest persons of heroic soul within every time, race, country, and gender. To be a member of the church is to carry the mantle of both the worst sin and the finest heroism of the soul. Because the church has always looked exactly as it looked at the original crucifixion. God hung between two thieves.
That's brilliant. It reminds me of a wedding I did one time here. There was a dirt poor couple that we had in our orbit here at the church, in our community. and they came to me and wanted to be married, and they're both, on social assistance, but they pulled together to the best of their ability this wedding, and I remember standing in the hall here, and they were a couple that would be, normally fairly unkempt. Not a lot of attention went into, outward appearance. They were like us on lawn cutting day, right?
Right.
Just normal, salt of the earth, down to earth people.
Sweet.
But wedding day came, and out she came from the back with this gorgeous white gown on. She was toothless, and that day she had put her dentures in, and she had the biggest smile. It looked like a cartoon shark coming down the aisle. Just these big white choppers.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And they get up, and I'm just. I love doing weddings because when else do you get that close to covenant? Yeah. And best intention. And so he's standing there and he's tearing up and he's looking at her, and I'm doing the ceremony, and I ask them to join hands, and I look down, and this woman who has done everything she can to beautify herself has dirty fingernails.
Right.
And I said, that's the church.
Yeah.
She's the bride who's trying really hard to look good.
Yeah.
And she's got dirty fingernails.
Yeah.
Rielly, it's been so good to be with you and talk through some of these things. If people want to get in touch with you, are you available on social media?
No, I don't want anyone talking to me. I am. Well, Rielly McLaren. My name is spelled Rielly.
Right.
McLaren, McLaren. So you can look me up on Facebook or at Rielly McLaren on social
not
media.
Mac.
Mick, Mick, not Mac, so that's the best way to find me, or RiellyMcLaren@gmail.com is a way to get in touch with me over email. And I want to thank you, Kevin, because you've been such an influence on my own journey, in terms of accepting me here at New Song, among our motley crew, and helping me find my voice. That I think is a big takeaway during my time pastoring here at New Song is finding my voice, and people being patient enough, with my long sermons and me to, playing around with, ideas in scripture, and to really get to the heart of something, and really sending me to St. Leonard's as a missionary in a lot of ways, and all the connection, community connection and collaboration and everything. It's just, I think back with so much fondness on the ways that it equipped me and empowered me, and I have no doubt that you're still doing that in amazing ways, and
thanks.
I'm grateful to be...
The mythology about me is much more enjoyable than the reality. So thank you.
And thank you for doing all this stuff.
Okay. Well, I hope that Rielly has stretched your heart, to belong to this kingdom where the lion can lie down with the lamb. That is an incredible philosophy to live by. And that's why we follow Jesus, because we believe that Jesus has the keys to that kingdom. Not only that, he's handed the keys over to us and said, okay, go ahead, boys. Go ahead, women. Unlock some doors for me. On our next episode, we're going to interview Adam White. And Adam, in addition to being the youth pastor that works with me at New Song Church, he is also the chaplain at the Salvation Army Center of Hope in downtown Windsor. Now, Adam, at about age 13, had run away from his home. He lived in a small town north of London, Ontario, and for a few days he was on the streets. He was also addicted to drugs at that point, but fortunately that part of his life had a dramatic turnaround, and today he is serving people who have many life struggles. And so join us for the next episode, and you're going to hear Adam White. I interviewed him last year, and just an incredible thing that God is doing in a young man. You know, when Rielly started as chaplain, he was 26 years old, and Adam, when he started working as a chaplain, was 26 years old. And an incredible thing to think that people in their 20s can have such a profound impact on people that are sometimes twice their age or more. And we need to know who the next generation of urban leaders are. And so I hope in the days to come that I'll have a chance to talk to many young leaders that are emerging across Canada in urban centers. Well, until the next time, I'm Kevin Rogers, and you've been listening to Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.